You know that moment when you're knitting along, feeling confident, and then the real question is, can I fix this? Or is it time to rip it all out and start over? Let's find out. Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Arletta, and if you've ever had a knitting project go completely off the rails, congratulations, you're officially one of us. Today we're diving into the age-old knitter's dilemma. What do you do when your project is a total mess? Do you fix it? Do you start over? Or do you pretend it never happened and hope no one notices? I recently had this project go completely sideways, and I figured, why suffer alone when I can share my struggles with you? So you've seen this before. I've been working on this while filming other videos, and it's one of my favorites. It was my first official big project. It is the Little Black Tea, although mine is purple. It's a Little Black Tea by Taylor Earl. I'll put the link down below. Picture is right over here. I've been working on it. Everything's going great. In fact, I got down to the point where I was ready to, I was going to try it on, see how much further I had to go before I could start splitting off, see if I was close yet. I had the right number of rows. It was the right length measuring when I measured it right, but I wanted to try it on just to make sure because, you know, we're all different. So I was transferring everything from my knitting needles onto my pearl strings, my tubing here. I've shown this to you before in my knitting tools video that came out recently, last week before. And see, little tubing. It's a little tiny thing. So you put on your needles, you just transfer it over. Everything was going great. I had about that much left of it, not far. And I'm moving along. Now, this is cotton fabric. It was kind of sticking a little. It doesn't slide real well on this tubing. So I'm pushing it and I'm stretching and I'm pulling. And you can see, let me see here. You see here, it gets really bunchy. See where it's all kind of bunched up together. So I was trying to stretch it out, move it along the tubing. And all of a sudden, the tubing broke. I kid you not, it was only about an 1.5 inch piece of the tubing, but it broke. So I had my needles with this much tubing on it over here, and the rest of the tubing got sucked right up into it. Needless to say, there were a few choice words at first. It was not a pretty sight. So I panicked. At first, it was like, okay, what are we gonna do? So here's the process I went through to figure out what I'm gonna do. I had a couple options. I could feed the loose end of the tubing back through the stitches to hook up again take off that short piece of tubing and put the tubing back on the needle. That was option number one. Option number two was to take some more yarn, feed it back through the other way, and try to hook it onto, end up replacing all the tubing with the yarn. Option number three was to essentially frog it. I do have a lifeline. If you look here, you can see this pink thread. I do have a lifeline back to where I started, where I finished my neck, the shaping of the neck and whatnot, and I was just starting on the yoke. So it wouldn't be completely back to the beginning, but it would be pretty darn close. I have about 11 inches worth of stuff here, and it would go back to probably about 2. So those were the options as I saw it. This was not something I could just cover up. So I decided, I'm gonna walk you through what I did. What I decided to do was do the yarn thing. I was gonna replace all of this tubing with the yarn, which worked great at first. So this is where I started. Took it, put the yarn on a needle, and started feeding it through. Got my knitting needles out of there. Got what was left of that tubing out of there, so on and so forth. And as I was doing it, I noticed, you know, I would drop a stitch here or there. I thought, that's okay. I can fix that, right? It's easy to fix a drop stitch. I'd be happy to show you how I do that in a future video. So like right here, I dropped this stitch. You can just see right there. It came out of this little piece right here is supposed to be through that loop. So I dropped those. So I thought, okay, that's okay. I can fix that. That's easy. So I kept doing it and doing it and doing it. I got the yarn all the way over here. Oh, and by the way, I lost my stitch markers along the way, which marked my increase where I did my raglan increases. But that's okay. I can figure that out. So I get all the way over here, and then I looked back at where the tubing began, where it broke. And see, here's where it broke. I tied a little knot in it to stop it because I realized it was sucking back in, going this way. As I was going this way with the yarn, the tubing was going backwards into the fabric, and I now have this much of stitching where I have to continue feeding all the way around here to get to it. Which, okay, fine and dandy. But I also realized that in doing this, I counted at least 25 stitches that I had dropped in that process, which was frustrating. And then I started looking at it and I realized that I knew I had a few spots where, you know, I had little spots that I knew I'd have to go back, kind of darn there to kind of fix. Again, keep in mind, this is my first like big project. So I knew there were going to be mistakes. Like right here, see, got a little peak right there. There's no saving this. So that is what happened. It's frustrating, but I figured I had a couple of ways of looking at this. I could either pitch a fit, which granted was my initial option that I thought about taking. And then I realized after messing with this for over an hour, trying to get the yarn through, and then realizing how much I had actually lost in the process, I realized I have a chance to frog this back to the lifeline. So it won't go beyond this because I have this thread in there. I have a chance to take it back and make it better, we hope. So now, I mentioned in another video that this is actually the second time I've had to start this over. The first time I didn't put in a lifeline, so I actually literally had to go back to the beginning. But I was knitting, I was actually almost at the same spot. Not quite, I wasn't quite so far. And the knitting needle, my cable broke right there at the joint of where it joins the needle itself. And I was just going along and same thing, doing my thing, and all of a sudden it just broke. And I was much less, that was about 6 months ago, so I didn't have as much experience as I do now. And so I ripped that whole thing out. So yeah, so that was my journey. I tried everything, and honestly, I was that close to just setting the thing on fire. But cotton doesn't burn as well as you'd like it to sometimes. So I decided that as much as I hated to do it, sometimes you have to admit, or at least reevaluate. And I decided that this time the yarn was going to win the battle, but it was not going to win the war. So hopefully in the future, I will have a finished shirt to show you. So this was my knitting. So question for you. Was this a knitting disaster or was it a hiccup? Either way, I know I survived. I know that sometimes you have to embrace the chaos. If you've ever had a knitting project go sideways, let me know in the comments. What's your biggest knitting fail? If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more knitting adventures, some crafty chaos, and hopefully a few less disasters. I'll see you in the next one.